Welcome back to Switch Top. 10 Switch 2 games have walked away with perfect 10 out of 10 scores from critics across the board. What matters here is what each one actually does with its story and mechanics, not just why it looks good on a store page or a trailer. Mina the Hollower. You play Mina, a hollower sent to repair a cursed island's failing spark generators, and the game buries her whip combat under 6 interconnected regions with barely any map to guide you. Getting lost is the intent, not a flaw. You piece the island together through NPC dialogue and environmental clues while unlocking permanent shortcuts as you go. Combat runs on 5 main weapons, plus swappable sidearms and trinkets, and a burrowing dash lets you dodge underground mid-fight or tunnel past obstacles. Critics landed the game around a 90 average, with several outlets calling it a genuine heir to both Zelda's exploration and Bloodborne's aggressive combat. It's dense and occasionally punishing, built for players who want to earn every discovery instead of being handed one. Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. Square Enix's reimagining of the Midgar arc finally makes it to a Nintendo console, bundled with the Intergrade DLC that adds a Yuffie-focused chapter and the Fort Condor minigame. What was originally a few opening hours of the 1997 original gets expanded into a 30-hour game here, filling in backstory for side characters like Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse, who barely registered before. The combat blends real-time action with a paused tactical menu for abilities and magic, so it plays fast, but still rewards managing your ATB gauge and materia setup instead of button mashing through it. On Switch 2, it holds a stable 1080p at 30 frames per second, a step down from PS5's higher frame rate modes, but notably closer to that experience than anyone expected from handheld hardware. Streamlined progression options let newer players ease in without touching the core combat design. Nintendo's first Splatoon spin-off drops the multiplayer arena entirely and goes single-player, casting you as a mechanic who crash lands on the Spiralite Islands with the Deep Cut trio in tow. Instead of turf wars, you're running raids, diving into combat zones, splatting waves of Salmonid-style enemies, then hauling loot back to your hideout ship to upgrade weapons and gear. One member of Deep Cut rides along each raid inside a mech called the Exploration Bot, handling extra firepower while you focus on ink and positioning. 3 adjustable difficulty tiers let you dial up the risk without touching your loot pool, and up to 3 friends can drop in online or locally. It's a clear structural shift for the series, closer to a loot-driven horde shooter than anything Splatoon's done before, though it keeps the core ink mechanics intact. It confidently commits to being something different instead of just Splatoon 3 with a story mode bolted on.
What else lies below the surface?
Lies of P Complete Edition. NeoWiz's Dark Pinocchio riff on Bloodborne finally lands on a Nintendo console with everything included. The base game, the excellent Overture expansion, and every cosmetic DLC bundled in. Your P, a puppet with actual free will in a plague-ravaged Belle Epoque city where the other puppets have turned homicidal. The signature system is weapon assembly, mixing blades and handles independently so your moveset and damage type change based on the combination, turning build variety into something you're constantly tinkering with. Fable arts tied to each weapon half-add unique special attacks on a charge meter, giving fights more texture than a typical parry-focused Souls-like. On Switch 2, you get performance, balanced, and quality modes, with performance holding a clean 60 frames per second at the cost of softer textures. Pragmata. Capcom's first original IP in years sends you to a decaying lunar research station as Hugh, an engineer, alongside Diana, an android who becomes something closer to a daughter than a sidekick as the story unfolds. The hook is a dual-input combat system, managing gunfire with one thumbstick while running a live hacking minigame with the other, essentially working both hands independently during firefights. It sounds fussy on paper but clicks fast, and boss encounters lean hard into forcing you to juggle both systems under pressure. The relationship between Hugh and Diana carries a game that could have coasted on visuals alone, with quiet hub scenes between missions doing a lot of the character work. On Switch 2, it targets 60 frames per second and mostly holds it outside of particle-heavy fights, running around 540 pi internally before upscaling.
Depending on the nodes you pass through, you can modify the damage and effects of a hack. Each split-second decision...
Blueprints. Finally reached Switch 2 after a year on other platforms, and the format suits it. You inherit a 45-room mansion with a catch. Find the rumored 46th room, except the layout redraws itself every day. Each door gives you 3 room options to draft, and every choice matters because your steps are limited and resets bring you right back to nothing. It's a slow burn mystery told through environmental notes and lore fragments rather than cutscenes, closer in spirit to Return of the Obra Dinn than a typical roguelike. The Switch 2 port adds mouse controls via Joy-Con for the terminal puzzles, though they feel stiff at the game's 30 frames per second cap, and there's no mid-run save, so sleep mode becomes your best friend on long sessions. What makes it click is how much it demands actual note-taking, turning the mansion into something you're still solving hours after you've put the controller down. Pokémon Pokopia. Game Freak's first life sim strips out battling entirely and hands you a Ditto who wakes up alone in a desolate, humanless Kanto with only Professor Tangrowth for company. The core loop is building habitats, block by block, using terrain-shaping moves you learn from the Pokémon you attract, like Bulbasaur's leafage to grow grass or Lapras's surf to cross water. It plays like Minecraft's destructible terrain crossed with Animal Crossing's town building, but there's a genuinely darker mystery running underneath the cozy surface about what happened to everyone. Journals and news clippings scattered around slowly explain the disaster, while the Pokémon themselves stay oblivious to what you're piecing together. It tied for Metacritic's highest Pokémon score ever, partly because it stays reflective rather than leaning on grinding for its own sake.
Collect rocks and wood to build with.
Donkey Kong Bananza. Nintendo's soft reboot of Donkey Kong ditches the character's history almost entirely and builds around one mechanic. You can destroy nearly all of it. Every wall, mountain, and layer of terrain is punchable, diggable, and reshapeable, and the level design constantly dares you to carve your own path instead of following the intended one. Structurally, it borrows Odyssey's moveset variety and Tears of the Kingdom's flexibility, then layers in a story that surprised people expecting a thin excuse plot. Pauline, a teenage version of the original arcade damsel, tags along as a fully written character whose arc becomes the real emotional throughline. Outfits crafted from collected fossils double as gameplay buffs rather than pure cosmetics, tailoring DK to whatever biome you're tearing through. Cyberpunk 2077, Ultimate Edition with Phantom Liberty expansion included on a single game card. Your V, a mercenary whose big score goes sideways and leaves a digital ghost of rockstar terrorist Johnny Silverhand, slowly overwriting your mind, forcing a race to find a cure while Night City throws every faction at you along the way. What's impressive isn't just that it runs, it's how much of the RPG's choice-driven structure and side content survive the trip intact, with hundreds of hours of material if you chase everything. The build leans on DLSS upscaling to hit a respectable resolution, both docked and handheld, adds gyro aiming and mouse control options tailored to the hardware, and holds up noticeably better than the original last-gen console versions ever did. Dogtown, the Phantom Liberty area, is the one spot where frame rate takes a real hit under pressure. Resident Evil Requiem. Grace Ashcroft, an anxious FBI analyst investigating her mother's decades-old murder at a hotel tied to Raccoon City survivors, and Leon Kennedy, now showing symptoms of the infection he spent his career fighting. Grace's sections run first-person and lean into resource scarcity and dread, closer to Resident Evil 7, while Leon's are third-person and action-heavy in the Resident Evil 4 mold, and you can swap either character's camera perspective on the fly. The story ties together Outbreak, the original Raccoon City incident, and the wider Umbrella mythology without leaning entirely on nostalgia to do the work. New antagonist Victor Gideon gives the plot a genuine through-line instead of recycling old villains. On Switch 2, the RE engine holds up better than expected, running cleanly in both docked and handheld modes. "10 perfect scores? Let us know in the comments which one you're still playing, and which 10 out of 10 you think we missed this time around.